Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters, and welcome to this week's live chat. I'm super excited to be hanging out with you, talking about my favorite thing, quilting. Today we're going to talk a little bit about wavy ruler designs, give you some inspiration and tips for picking out those fun rulers. And if you're watching live, as always, Jessica's behind the camera, monitoring the chat, kicking out the spammers, and writing down your questions. So if you have any questions, be sure to put them out and I'll try to answer them at the end. If you haven't joined a live chat before, I'm super glad you're here. I love just kind of spending a little bit of time giving some little tidbits about machine quilting and just kind of, chatting about that and kind of hanging out with the community. And then if you get on a little bit earlier, about half an hour before, I'd like to type chat as well. So it's kind of fun. Anyway, so the last video or last live chat, I kind of talked about straight edge rulers and tips for working with those. And so this one, we're kind of building off of that series. We're going to talk about wavy rulers, and I'm going to show you some pictures and some examples. This is actually just kind of a recap off of a previous video series I did, machine quilting with rulers. So if you want to try it, you can check out that free video series on my YouTube channel or my website. But I said this yesterday, but I'm going to say it, or said this last week, but I'll say it again. Quilting with rulers is one of those skills that really grow with you on your journey. So it's definitely one that's worth learning. Now, I get it in the beginning, it's a little tricky. And even before I went live, we were kind of typing about it, and somebody was saying how it's hard to keep that ruler from slipping. It takes a little bit of a learning curve. It feels like a weird kind of appendage that you're working with. But after you get used to it, it gets a lot easier. But last week, we kind of talked about straight edge rulers, and I said, that's really, if you're going to pick one ruler, the straight edge ruler is the one I would suggest. Just because, it's the most versatile. You can use it for stitching in the ditch and those straight line designs, but also because the point of contact with your ruler to your foot is the same no matter where you are on that ruler. But once we get beyond the straight edge rulers to wavy rulers and pointy rulers and all that kind of stuff, then we have to kind of think through that point of contact. And so practicing it really helps. But once we go, I'm going to show like wavy rulers today, and then next week we'll talk about a different type of ruler. But the thing I want to point out is that not every ruler is for every quilter. There's, 1.5 million rulers on the market, and so it's kind of hard to know which one you should go for or if you even like it. So as I'm doing these live chats for the next couple of weeks, just remember it's like, you might find one helpful, you might find one not so helpful. So it's totally up to you. And the problem is sometimes it's hard to know what you like, right? So wavy rulers, in the video tutorial that I did for that video series, I kind of showed how to use it. But to be honest, I don't use wavy rulers very often. I feel pretty comfortable freehanding a wave, and so I don't use them a lot. On the other hand, though, if I'm working with a design that has to be symmetrical on both sides, like an arc or something with a point, I definitely want a ruler for that because I have trouble with that. So it just depends on your preferences, what you like to quilt, what you struggle with quilting. So don't feel like, oh, I have to get everything and learn how to do all of them, because it's definitely not that case. But let's talk about wavy rulers. Like I said, this is from a video series that I did, machine quilting with rulers. And throughout the video series, I kind of break it down by ruler type, right? So one video is about the straight edge ruler. The next one is about wavy rulers. It's not about a specific ruler. I do have my favorites, of course, but it's just about the type of ruler. So check out that video series if you want to quilt along with that. But in the second video of that series, I talk about wavy rulers. So wavy rulers obviously help you quilt wavy lines, obviously, but there's some other things you can do with it as well. Using that wave kind of as a spine to your feather is a nice option, especially if you want it to be very regular. Like I said, I don't mind if it moves around and maybe isn't perfectly symmetrical, but if you want that precise look, you can definitely use it for that. Of course, wavy line designs, but also I like to combine my rulers with free motion quilting. The thing is, I get kind of bored doing the same thing over and over. So switching it up means I'll stay a little bit more engaged. But sometimes, using those wavy rulers to maybe quilt bigger sections that you can fill in. So in this example, the black line is the quilting I did with the wavy ruler, just to make those shapes or areas that I can then fill in with free motion quilting. So I like to say this, I hope it makes sense, but using rulers is a tool, it's not a crutch. So use it for what you want to use it for, and then don't use it for what you don't want to use it for. All right, what to look for in a wavy ruler. This is always the big question, right? Like, well, which one should I get? Like I said, there's so many different types on the market. when you're looking at wavy rulers, we're thinking about like the depth of the wave. That's going to be this part right here. Maybe the size of the overall ruler, like here. And so really there's a lot of different options. It depends, right? It depends on what you want to work with. You can tell we have some big ones and some little ones. So this one just has one wave. But there's also rulers that you can use that maybe aren't necessarily wavy rulers. So here I have Elvira, and we'll see this again in a second. So sometimes a ruler that you have for something else might actually be a wavy kind of ruler. So when you're looking through waves or trying to decide which kind of ruler to try out, these are the kind of things you want to think about. In the beginning, I mean, if you want a rule, I know some quilters like a rule, like tell me what to do. I would say aim for maybe a smaller ruler because you can reposition it more often and it's just a little less unwieldy. But maybe you have a long arm and you want a big long ruler, that's totally fine too. So, but also the wave, how much waviness do you want? And then, really the reference lines are important as well. The one thing I would say, when you're looking at wavy rulers, look for something that says needle stop or a measurement. So this is just something that gives me a point to reposition. Most wavy rulers have those. That just helps make it easy to keep that quilting nice and continuous. Now, like I said, you might not have a wavy ruler, but you can use other rulers just like you would a wavy ruler. So it's kind of getting versatile use or getting more out of the rulers that you already have. So for instance, if I have Chevy here, I didn't design the Chevy ruler as necessarily a wavy ruler, but I can still do wavy type designs with it using just that one side. Also, I think I pulled up a couple. Elvira. Elvira was designed for doing continuous curve in 2-inch blocks, but I also thought, it's kind of cool with that nice little curve. It doesn't give me, a repeating wave. It's a little bit different looking, but I can still use it like that. So you might already have some rulers on hand that work. And Squiggy is another example. Squiggy is a ruler I designed to look like serpentine lines, but I could use it as a wavy ruler as well. So using your rulers in a lot of different ways just helps you get more versatile use out of it. Now, here's the thing. You get the ruler and then you don't know what to do with it. I totally get that. I don't know if you've ever been to a quilt show and somebody's demoing it or showing some tool and you're like, that's so cool. And you get it home and you're like, I don't know what they did. So, what you use your ruler for just depends on really what you want to work with. So I'm going to show some design inspiration, just some ideas here. But the one thing I want to encourage you, if you get a ruler and you want to try it out, try it in a lot of different ways. Maybe you don't want to use it for one type of design, but you like it a different way. So really kind of play around with that and you'll find kind of your happy spot. So shocker, you can use that wavy line to do wavy designs. I know, right? Crazy. All over waves or these kind of wavy lines on your quilt are a great option. The one thing about quilting wavy line designs though, or all over waves, is that I gotta make sure that I keep those lines fairly consistent. That's really where I struggle with using wavy rulers, because if I'm doing it over a bigger area, it's just really easy to drift. So you can mark some reference lines on your quilt to kind of help you line up your ruler as you work your way through an area. If you're newer to machine quilting or newer to quilting with rulers, maybe try out your wavy all over wave design in a little bit of a smaller area. Maybe not over the whole quilt the first time, because it does take a little bit of getting used to doing each row. And one thing I don't think I really talked about this in the tutorial, the video that's part of that series, is when I'm quilting wavy lines, I like to go back and forth. But you might find it easier to always start on one side and work your way over, since the starting point is always going to be the same. That wasn't even in my notes. That's just like a little bit of a freebie there. But beyond that, beyond doing a nice movement with those all over waves or adding a little bit of curve to your quilt, you can do some other variations of that. This one is kind of my favorite. It's overlapping waves. I mean, this is when I'm trying to do regular waves, and this is kind of how it looks. Okay, now I'm only half serious. But in this example, I'm just kind of overlapping those waves to give it a fun, random look. But let's be honest, why am I doing this? Probably because I'm trying to get comfortable using my ruler, right? When we're looking at all over waves, if they're not perfectly spaced out, it's pretty obvious. It's noticeable if it's not quite right. But if I overlap them and make them go, overlap in different amounts, it's not quite noticeable if I didn't do it right. So this is a great option if you want a more whimsical look for your quilts, or if you're just practicing that wavy ruler and trying to get the hang of it. Now, here is the little tidbit. I think I gave it in the tutorial, but I'll say it again. If you're going to overlap those waves, do it enough, overlap them enough so that it looks intentional. Even if it isn't, right? I don't want it to be kind of overlapped and it just looks like I messed up. No, I'm gonna overlap those by quite a bit. So it's kind of like if you're gonna make a mistake, make it big enough so it looks like you meant to do it. But again, it's a great way to practice a design. Novelty quilts are a little bit more of a whimsical look. But once you get the hang of quilting those wavy lines, well then you say, that's so nice, I want to do it twice, and you can make some wavy crosshatch here. So in this example, I quilted my waves in one direction and then quilted the other way. Here's the thing. When I'm doing something like this, I'm not going to worry so much that it's perfectly, like that this wave hits at this point. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to get it close and move on. But if you're going to try this, you don't have to fill in the whole area. You can do a little bit of overlap in some areas. Maybe as a way to draw attention to a spot because it has a little bit more quilting, or maybe you quilted your first section of wavy lines and they're not looking so great. If that's the case, overlapping it just kind of helps hide any of those mistakes. You know, it's kind of the idea like if you make a quilting mistake, just keep putting more mistakes around it till it looks good. Well, this kind of goes with that there. Or you can do it the whole way. Now, this example of the wavy crosshatch is actually one of my favorites to show. So I have wavy lines going one direction and wavy lines going the other. It looks fun, adds some texture to it, it's great. Those are actually two different waves. I quilted the horizontal lines with a shallower wave, and then I did the vertical with a different wave. But what I love about it is it's not even noticeable when you look at it. I mean, I didn't notice it. You might have noticed it, but I didn't. You look at it and it just looks like it's supposed to look. So that kind of goes to show, like, if one isn't perfect, it's going to be fine. Just keep going and keep filling in the area. Now, as a little caveat about this is going to take twice as long to quilt, obviously, so make sure you love the people you're doing this for. And if I were quilting this on a sewing machine, I personally would do all of one direction first and then come back and do all the other direction, as opposed to kind of working in a way like that. That way, I'm not committed to doing the crosshatch until a little bit later on. So that's just kind of how my mind works there. Now, with the all over waves, right, we're quilting that wavy line and we're quilting those echo lines. In general, I'm trying to keep that spacing consistent. I mean, if you've watched any of my tutorials, you know I say a million times, like, keep it consistent as long as the spacing is consistent. But sometimes we can go the other way with that to give it a different look. So all of the wavy line designs are echoed. But in this example, I'm varying the spacing between those echo lines just to draw a little bit of different attention. So instead of being an overall kind of consistent texture, I'll have little bits that kind of pop out here and there. Also, it's a little bit quicker because I have less lines in it. So I kind of just mocked up some diagrams to show you what that would look like. So I'm sure you can probably get the idea of it, but I like my little diagrams. It makes me feel very teachery. But I'd quilt the first wave as normal. And then if I'm working my way back and forth, it's up to you, but I travel along the edge and get to the next one. If I'm starting again at the beginning, then I'll tie off and start a new line of quilting. So let's say I'm going to echo these about 1/4 inch apart, just for an example here. Perfect. Now the next line I'm going to do, I'm going to actually make it more spaced out, right? So 1/4 and then 1/2 inch. And what that's going to do is give it that variation there. But if you do that, just make sure there's enough difference in between those widths, right? I don't want to do like 1/2 inch and 5/8 inch. I mean, nobody's going to actually quilt that, but make sure that there's enough difference, again, that it looks intentional, and that it looks kind of like you meant to do it. Again, it's just going to give it a little bit of a different look. You're going to see a little bit more of the unquilted area in between, and it's faster. But the great thing is, if I did this and I didn't love how it looked, I could easily come back in and add some more wavy lines in between them if necessary. So kind of gives me a little bit of room to finagle that. This is an example of that idea using the varied spacing there. It's about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch in between the two, but you can make it even more of a difference. But this was quilted using the Chevy ruler. So not technically a wave, but it gives you that idea. Sometimes when you look at a diagram, it's hard to get an idea of the texture of the quilting. So a fun option there. Now this is one that's a little bit different. So it's offset waves. Have you ever seen like quilting where the wavy lines kind of get closer and further apart? I love the way that looks because it's just those pops of texture as those lines kind of move. Plus, if the wavy line isn't perfect or the spacing isn't perfect, it's not as noticeable because there's so much movement going on there. It could be a little tricky to wrap your mind around how to do that, but it's actually not too hard once you get the hang of it. So I'm going to quilt my first wave as normal, right? Whether you're using whatever wave you're using. whatever wavy ruler you're using. But then when I go to do the second row, instead of quilting an echo line, I'm going to take my ruler and shift it to the left about a ½ inch or so. So shifting it over just means that that whole wavy line isn't going to be a perfect echo. It's just going to be kind of closer in some areas and further apart in others. You have to play with this and kind of see like what your preferences are or what you like, but it's a really fun way. So shifting the ruler to the left about a ½ inch and then quilting your next row like that. And what happens is like they automatically get that closer and further apart. Now, it depends on the ruler. For this idea of doing these offset waves, I would use something that has more of a shallow wave. I don't want something that's so zigzaggy because it kind of doesn't look quite right to me. So just a heads up there. And I'm going to keep doing that. So every row, I'm going to shift the ruler over. So the next row, I'm going to shift it over another ½ inch and then do the same thing. So shifting it over is what just kind of helps it get to that point. Now, at some point, you're going to get to where you have no more ruler left and you'll just start over at your starting point. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, it adds a cool texture as those lines get further and closer together. I love how it looks. And here you can kind of see that idea. I will tell you, I struggle with maintaining this idea over a big area. So this might be something I'm going to put in maybe a smaller area just because it's a lot to remember. And sometimes when I'm quilting, I've had my glass of wine and I just don't need a lot of that stuff to think about. So one other option you can do, if you like the look of it, but it's a little too much, you can try this where you just alternate between the first two rows. You're going to get a little bit of that look, but it's just going to be a little bit easier. So I'm going to do my first row the same, but the second row I'm going to shift over, right? So I'm always going to shift my ruler and do that second row just like we already saw. So far so good. But then when I go do the next one, that third row will be the original starting point. So at the very end of the ruler. So I'm kind of just alternating between those two. And that's just going to give me that look as they kind of get close to each other. I love this. I think it looks kind of like ribbon that's kind of curling. This might be a nice border treatment design. It could be great for sashings or around a block when you want to add just a nice curvy look. And then you also don't have to remember all the different ones. So you can kind of see what that looks like there. Now, if you want to try this out, it's actually pretty easy if you can remember all the numbers, but you can experiment with different amounts of shifting that ruler over. The further I shift the ruler, the more difference there's going to be in that line. So you can kind of play around with that and see what you like. I like to say I'm only the expert of my opinion, but the good news is you're the expert of your opinion. Now, this is probably the point where I start feeling like an infomercial, right? But wait, there's more. When I show all the variations or the design ideas, it's just really to kind of make you think of different ways to use your ruler, or maybe a design that maybe sticks out to you a little bit more than another. Like I said, not every ruler is for every quilter, and not every quilting design is for every quilter either. Mirrored waves are one of my favorite ones to do, just because it does that really kind of cool, shape where the lines get closer and further together, and it leaves me areas to fill in with other designs. So quilting that is not difficult. The hardest part about it is just getting used to working the ruler on both sides. So first wave is normal, whatever ruler you're working with. But when I quilt my second wave, I want to quilt it so that it's opposite of the first, right? So if I'm going to, if the line is coming up on one line, I want it to be going down on the other. So one easy way to get that mirror image is to put the ruler on the other side of the foot. So on a long arm, I might do on this side, then if I put it over there, then I get that slightly different look. On a sewing machine, it's so much easier on a sewing machine because you can just turn the quilt around and then use the same side. So play around with that, but mirrored lines, kind of mirrored waves, what gives it that little bit of a different look there. And you can kind of see I can just repeat working my way through. It sounds harder than it is. It's like they just get closer and further apart. And if it's not perfectly mirrored, it'll just be opposite, right? Maybe I should take the mirrored out and just make it opposite waves. And like I said, when we're using rulers that maybe aren't necessarily wavy rulers, we can still try that design out. And so here we can see the Chevy. You can see that wave, and that's just a mirrored wave, right? I just did the other side of the foot on the alternating lines. And I love that kind of look. So I guess it's good. I like it. All right, when we take all that, that's like a lot of things to think through. When you're practicing with it, I love to tell people, get a yard of fabric, try a bunch of different stuff, right? Cut out the pieces you like and then throw the rest away or use it in something else. But when you're practicing or trying different things, try overlapping, echoing, mirroring, But then you can also take all of those and mix them up together, right? I can echo and mirror. I could, alternate and offset. So it's just like a lot, but there's a lot of options out there. So I just pulled some samples. I kind of was looking through all my ruler quilting samples, like, what is this? So this right here is an example of quilting the wavy lines with Elvira. You can tell it's not a perfect repeating wave. It has that little point in there, but I love how that looks. Also, when I have that point, it's a great place to stop and reposition. So it kind of helps hide that little bobble that can happen when you're transitioning your ruler. So I quilted that, quilted another echo line close, and then mirrored and echoed. So kind of combining the echoing and mirrored. I don't know if that's an actual verb, but we'll go with it. But it just gives me a slightly different look. Again, playing around with it and seeing what you like and how it looks. And it just looks a little different. I like it. You can also echo your lines and then offset them. So here we have 3. I know it's a little bit of a different shape using my Chevy ruler, but it's the same idea, kind of overlapping them and echoing them. It's going to give me that kind of more, kind of complex look, a little bit of unquilted area in between them. And the great thing about those little pops of unquilted area is I really believe that people will notice, a gap in the quilting before they notice an error. And so that unquilted area just gives you something to zoom in on or just something to notice. And it makes it look all better. And of course you can combine it with other rulers. Now, this maybe isn't what you do right out the gate, but like I said, your rulers can grow with you on your journey, right? So maybe you start with just some echoed waves, and then next thing you know, you're combining them with clamshells and using it to fill in those irregular background areas. So much fun and looks really cool too. And then you can also do something like this where you're echoing and overlapping them. So cables, the very traditional hand quilting design. I love how it looks. Not as easy to machine quilt, but when you're using your wavy ruler, it can be a little bit easier. So this might be an example of when I would use that wavy ruler. I would struggle free motioning this. A cable has to look a certain way, right? So again, it's a tool to help me in particular areas. I'm just gonna break down the cable design because once you see how it comes together, it's really not too complex. It's easy to see how it goes together, maybe not as easy to make it happen or to quilt it out. But I'm just gonna quilt a few wavy lines, just like we did with our regular wavy lines. But then when I quilt my next one, I'm going to mirror it and overlap it, right? So that you can tell it's going the opposite direction and then it's overlapping. And that's what's gonna give it that cable look. Depending on the waviness of your ruler and the spacing between your lines, it's gonna have a different look, but you can kind of see here the really cool effect. It's fun to see this, and I included a picture here because when you do a diagram, it's perfect, right? I used Illustrator to make my waves, no problem. But quilting is a totally different thing. And if you look close at my quilting, you can see that some lines are closer and some are further apart. Now, I know, I tell all of you out there to not point out your mistakes, but I can point out my mistakes because I'm a professional. It's totally fine. But I just want to show you that really, it's not going to give you perfect quilting. It's just a tool to help you get it somewhat close. So try not to be too hung up on the perfection of it all and just get it as close as you can. I promise it's going to look fine, especially when the whole quilt is done and you can kind of step back and admire your beautiful quilting. Now, that was a quick 15 minutes of here's all the ways you can use your ruler, right? But if you want to download I have a free downloadable PDF with quilting diagrams and tips for using rulers. And this is straight from that Free Motion Challenge video series I did about the machine quilting with rulers, which you can find on my YouTube channel. But sometimes it just helps having the piece of paper next to you and you can kind of see the steps and work through that. But I promise, the more you work with it, the easier it gets. I know, especially in the beginning with wavy rulers, it can be tricky because as that point of contact on the foot changes, sometimes we kind of do this thing where we kind of veer off, right? We're like, whoop, here I go. But the more you practice, the easier it gets. When I say it doesn't have to be a crutch, what I mean is if you can quilt a wavy line and feel comfortable with it, go for it. But if you want to do something like the cables, then pull in your ruler, right? You don't have to use it for every single wavy line, but definitely use it in those areas that you want. And then maybe dig through all your rulers at home and you might just have something like, Elvira that will work good for multiple things. So again, one of those specific type of rulers, but a lot of fun to quilt with once you get the hang of it. I see we have a few questions over there. I know that one of the questions, it'd be interesting to see what comes in. But one of the questions is talking about how the ruler moves a lot. I could have just talked about this before I got the questions, but especially with wavy rulers, we really want to try to stay in position. And so we were talking about handy grip before we started the type chat. I was type chatting. This handy grip is like a tape that just sticks to the back of the rulers and helps keep it from slipping. The bigger the rulers are, the harder it's going to be to keep in place, so that kind of helps that. But some of the rulers, like my ones with Creative Grids, already has a grip on the back. It's just not quite as grippy. So if you want it to stay in place and not move, you can try getting some of that tape. And I can add, this is like a piece of tape that I cut into pieces, I can add as much or as little of the tape as I need or as I want. But if I'm working with a wavy ruler and it's slipping, maybe I put it on the points where it's moving around. Like maybe if I have trouble going around this point, I can put pieces there, right? Or I could coat the whole thing with it if I want to, but sometimes just putting it in this position helps. Is the Versatool ruler a good one to start with? I don't have one right here, but the Versatool has like 3 different things. It has curves, clamshell, a straight edge, and like a dime or a wedge shape there. It's a great ruler to start with if you just want to try out some different shapes and see how it feels. It's nice and hand-sized, so it's not too big and intimidating. That would be perfect for somebody that's not sure what kind of rulers they like and maybe wants something a little bit smaller. So it could be, definitely. What size stitch do I prefer? That's from Charlene. So I prefer any stitch that doesn't catch my toe in it when I pull the quilt over me. I don't have a stitch regulator on my sewing machine and I don't use it on my long arm, so I just kind of have an organic stitch length. And I will say, when I'm quilting on the rulers, especially if I'm going around a curve, sometimes I'll find that my stitches are maybe slightly closer or further apart because maybe I'm going faster at one point of it. But if you want a rule to follow, I say 10 to 12 stitches per inch is a good option. If you're doing those tight curves or something with a little bit more of a wave, maybe aim more towards a 12 stitches per inch. Hopefully that helps. Teresa, is Elvira identically symmetrical on opposite sides? Yes, if I remember that correctly. Yes, it is the same. It's symmetrical on both sides, so same idea. But you know, some rulers aren't. I'll pull this one back up. So this is a different wave than on that side. So it just depends on the ruler that you get. Hopefully that helps. When doing horizontal wavy borders and using small wavy rulers, how do I line up the ruler so the wave looks consistent? I pray. I drink a lot of wine and I pray. And then I just put on dark glasses and I can't even see what it looks like. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. Using reference lines are going to be your friend, especially if I'm wanting it to be particular in an area. If it's in a smaller border or a sashing, that seam is going to be pretty close to the ruler and I can use that seam to line it up. Some rulers have, I can see that horizontal and vertical reference lines, and that's what I'm lining up with that seam. But if it's a bigger area where I don't have a boundary to use, then I'm going to I could maybe mark out a couple of reference lines, maybe every, I don't know, 6 inches or so, just to kind of help keep it straight. But here's the thing, best laid plans and all that, right? I can mark it out or I can really try, but it's going to move. We're moving fabric. We're trying to quilt this line. Just get it close. I promise it's going to be fine. When doing the waves, do I start in the center or the side, and does it matter? It depends on the machine that I'm using. So this is from Dawn. If I'm working on a long arm, I start from the top and work my way down. And I'm only doing horizontal waves on a long arm. You could not pay me enough to do vertical waves, right? Preaching it to the choir. However, on a sewing machine, you can start anywhere you want. In general, I like to start in the center because it's never going to be heavier or more difficult at that point. At the center of the quilt, you have all the bulk in here and over here. So I like to start with the hardest, take the biggest bite out first. But you can start on the end. And this question wasn't asked, but like on a sewing machine, let's say I want to get rid of my pins. I've pin basted. I could quilt my wavy lines maybe 12 inches apart and then come back and fill in between them. So how you approach a design is totally up to you, your preferences, and what you're working with. Right? On a long arm, I'm going to quilt one and echo, 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 echo. But on a sewing machine, I could space them out and come back and fill it in, right? Maybe I'm not sure if I want to do 1/4 inch spacing, so I'm going to do 1/2 inch spacing, and I can always come back and add some more. So really, you can start on a sewing machine anywhere you want. It does not really matter. I will say on a sewing machine, I like to quilt vertically. So I'm going to be quilting so that I'm moving like this along the ruler, but you could also go horizontally. So try that out and find what works for you. And I will tell you, with every quilt that you finish, you're going to learn something. Sometimes it's what not to do, And sometimes you're like, okay, that worked out really good. So try not to be too discouraged when you're going, because I promise when you're done, you still have a finished quilt. And we know I like to say a finished quilt is always better than a perfect quilt top. So a lot about wavy rulers, but if you have them or ever want to try them, I hope this has given you some encouragement to check that out. And if you haven't done the Machine Quilting with Rulers Free Motion Challenge video series, be sure to check that out. I show how to do it on a sewing machine and a long arm, and if you want to get the free diagrams, you can just click the link in the description box below. And in the description box, I should say, is also a link to the video series as well, so you don't have to go hunt it up on your own. Okay, well, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I don't take your attention for granted, and I'm glad that we get to do this. So I appreciate you spending your afternoon with me as well. If you're not watching live, which I get it, most people are working right now, you can leave your questions in the comment sections, and I get on there from time to time to answer them and see how it's going. So you can definitely check that out. Now, I'll be back next Thursday with the next live chat. I'm going to talk about arced rulers, so arcs, how to create. Now, those are ones I use a lot more, and I can't wait to talk about all the fun designs you can do with them. Until then, everybody, stay safe and